So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is another game that was given to me by Tommy, and actually I think this is a map that he has given me once before in the past. That was a straight up custom scenario, whereas this is going to be a battle where all of the armies can be picked by the people who are playing, and we'll get onto him in just a moment I think, but yeah, it will play out in much the same way actually, because I think there is going to be a deployment phase where the blue team, the evil factions today, are going to be allowed to move forward to take up a defensive position at the top of these cliffs, and then the attackers will of course have to march up in a beach landing fashion with all of these makeshift fortifications and some more prepared fortifications also available for the defenders today to be using. A beach landing like this of course means there's going to be a lot of open space early on for the attackers to have to deal with. It means that the defenders can basically have free reign at shooting into whatever they please, but this does light a fire under the attackers. It does mean they have to be quick and swift in trying to make their way through any initial defences, because if they do get caught up for too long then the damage that could be done to them might be terminal. And of course in a 4v4 the attackers, as we've seen recently, may wish to take their time, but that may not be an option for them on this occasion. The forces are good on the attack as well. We've seen recently that the elves do struggle in some respects on the attack, especially if they get bottled up. It's where their lower numbers can be used against them. Red Knight playing as Mirkwood. Mirkwood don't have the highest armour scores, although they can mitigate that in their mainline units by upgrading the armour to make them a little bit more resilient. And the Hiriak here at the front also have big shield values, which does help them, the most defensively adept of all of Mirkwood's frontline troops, and they will need to be as they try to push their way through these defensive positions. But where Mirkwood do struggle a little bit in terms of numbers and all-round resilience, they can of course make up for in terms of damage, particularly ranged units of their own. And as much as the cliffs do give the defenders a potential advantage here, Mirkwood's range and damage means that the lack of cover at the top of those cliffs could be a problem for anyone who needs to try and repulse Red Knight's advance. Lang, they do lack a shield, so even with this armour upgrade they are going to be a little bit vulnerable potentially to the enemy, but this is one of the better examples perhaps of what I just said. They will be vulnerable to all of those ranged units and getting bottled up, but they will be able to do an impressive amount of damage. Especially most evil factions tend to do quite poorly in isolated melee engagements against heavy elven swordsmen, so we'll see if Mirkwood are going to be able to really leverage that melee damage that they certainly have in abundance. Elder Council can be a very useful unit as well for cracking through stubborn front lines. They're not particularly impressive in melee, it must be said, and they don't have the efficiency of some of the cheaper units of javelins in the game, because of course elven units in general tend to be a little bit more expensive. They are less numerous as well, so the DPS on these units is a little bit more questionable, but they will still do the same job ultimately, just for a less efficient price. Javelins will do a good job at breaking through any stubborn phalanxes, which Mirkwood of course don't have phalanx units of their own, so they will be reliant on ranged units, though they typically rely more so on their archers. The Hiripang here, for example, heavier elven archer, good in melee, more resilient than the other Mirkwood skirmishers as well, outside of their highest levels. And then we have of course big amounts of damage per arrow, which is going to be key if Mirkwood are going to make any sort of progress early. Elder Council here as well. We've got the Elven King's Guard, one of the best all-round units Mirkwood have, I think. They are pretty expensive, but ultimately the combination of being very strong at range, like the Hiripang in front of them, but having that armour-piercing edge in melee really does make a difference to them, I think. So yeah, strong and robust, but we'll see if that's going to be enough. They are reasonably expensive after all. Silverthorn arrows, the likes of which the Elder Royal Council traffic in, are usually more useful for defenders, but they could be fairly helpful as well for, again, jumbling up any sort of defensive blocks that the defenders want to put in place on these hills. They are also very strong in melee, of course. Just in general, most like bodyguard tier elven archers are going to be really good all round. They often have specialty projectiles, and their melee capabilities are always really high as well. So we shall see how well they get on over the course of this battle. And of course, ever the fan favourite unit, the Elder Palace Guard. Very, very good all round. Anti-cavalry, huge amounts of damage, exactly what you want. You can upgrade the armour, which Red Knight has elected to do here as well. Of course, as much as the elves are expensive, this will not be the entirety of the army. I'm sure there are hidden units here and there as well. Woodland Realm Axemen and Woodland Realm Patrol as basic level units spring immediately to mind as trying to pad out the numbers a little bit more so. Now then, moving over to the next army across, we have Joey, who's going to be playing as the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains. And since the last battle we saw them in, on the map that I called like the Gwathlo Banks, I think it was, we have some changes. Most of the changes actually in this mini patch, which consists of one battle, because then another mini patch happened after this, so I had to make sure to get this one in, were to Ered Luin, and increasing the faction's effectiveness a bit. Spearguard of Thorin's Halls, much unchanged. I mean, heavy spears, there's only so much you can do with them after all. They are going to be a resilient unit, but perhaps better in this sort of situation than the elven ones. They will be less damaging, and I think their shield value might even be a little bit lower, but overall the thickness of their armour is going to really help them in all respects when it comes to trying to advance up hostile terrain. Juggernauts, of course, are fantastic when it comes to pure melee combat. The lack of a shield might be an issue. I've placed under sustained arrow fire, but again, dwarven units, especially bodyguard tier dwarven units, will always have fantastic armour values, to the point where basic evil archers probably won't do much anyway. And then of course you have to factor in the fact that their melee defense in conjunction with that armour makes them incredibly resilient. Just in behind them we have some Guardians of the Blue Mountains. We already mentioned the Elven Javelins. I kind of think the same is true of these guys as well. They are going to be a little bit more resilient being dwarves in this sort of situation and focusing more on armour and survivability, but the fact that there are less of them and the fact that, you know, they are more expensive makes them more difficult to use. The potential upshot to all of this is that they are better in melee, so if they do get engaged, if they are used in such a way, they will make a bigger difference than, you know, entry-level javelins like ruffians or orc fodder, orc javelins I should say. But yeah, an interesting class of unit. We'll see if they can be utilised effectively here. Warns of Thorin's Halls wearing their shield on their back. That dual wielding is a bit of a theme in the Blue Mountains, so their melee defense and armor combination make them very, very good at keeping themselves alive in melee engagements. And the Warns of Thorin's Halls will be very comfortable against most evil units in melee. Frost Spears of Azaghal. Again, all of it will really depend on Arc of Fire. If they can get a really continuous stream of projectiles. We saw in the last battle actually with them in, they didn't seem to do all that well, but by the end of the battle they actually had racked up a decent kill count for themselves, so if they can isolate the defenders here, they should be on to a winner. Basic Dwarven Shock Infantry, of course, combines the, you know, decent survivability that the Dwarven armour gives them, as well as not losing out at all on the armour-piercing punch that this kind of unit can deliver, and most evil factions to an extent are going to rely on their armour, certainly the Orcish ones, so it will always be somewhat useful. And then all round we've seen in pretty much every battle that the Blue Mountains have been in before the changes made to their faction, the High Thanes of Azaghal as a bodyguard tier javelin unit are fantastic. They do a lot of damage with their projectiles, and then pulling out those halberds in melee makes them very effective there as well. More Wardens, but enough dancing around the fact they do have another single entity unit now as well, and we'll see him as the battle goes along, the Stone Giant of Ered Luin. Very grim visage there, but again, we'll speak about him more as the battle goes along, I think. But yeah, single entity units in Medieval 2 are difficult to get working, but we have seen it in Silmarillion, and now we shall see the same in Reforged. Dorwinion, over on the other side of the map of Middle-earth, played by Y2K86. Elvalin Marksmen, the basic human units for Dorwinion will make up for maybe the lack of numbers that both the dwarves and elves before them do suffer from a little bit, and the Elvalin Marksmen should be good in this kind of situation at trading back and forth with archers atop those cliffs over there. But they have decided to go for more of the Morroquendi bow, so more along the lines of what you can expect from Mirkwood, although the poison arrows do make a difference here, and especially against evil factions you can make them panic, but that will likely be the sort of thing which happens later, and I don't know if the attackers are going to have the luxury of saving this amount of archers for later. I think they're going to have to commit them early. Mentioned how cheap javelins can really be very effective, and that's why the River Patrol are definitely the choice here. They do have that shield which helps them a little bit, but obviously survivability is not really the name of the game. Cheap, cheerful and efficient. That's what this sort of javelin unit offers you, and of course trying to punch their way through those narrow gaps, they're going to be very, very important. Combination of the Elvalin Infantry and Elvalin Vineguard, so the Swordsman and the Spearman. Spearman a little bit more defensively adept. The Swordsman will do a little bit better at dealing damage to those basic units of evil infantry. But the main attraction here is the good combination of armour and stamina that the Elvalin units will offer you. They will keep fighting, you know, in pretty adverse conditions as well. and those armour scores will of course help them against those pesky projectiles that I'm sure the defenders will want to be using. Morroquendi pikes, I do like the fact that their pikes look a little bit more slender now rather than really long, thorny, like crescent moons really. I mean it looked interesting but it didn't look all that effective, but now a little bit more slender. Of course, elven pikes can be really, really effective if the fight is going in your favour and you can dictate the pace, because the damage they can do is pretty good, but they are going to be fairly vulnerable, and you know, if you end up taking a lot of damage to them quickly, it can be a real problem. And then we have T.S. Niehoff playing as Dol Amroth. Dol Amroth did have some changes in the version before. We did see it briefly in one battle, but they can bring a lot of these Belfalas Marines now, a combination of light to medium javelin men, you know, that are decent in melee, pulling out an axe to do a decent amount of damage. Not overly expensive, but the fact that you can bring so many before the red limit means that you're going to be able to saturate your front line with a unit that can throw these javelins. The armour-piercing damage they deliver could be key, and it's going to be a real hallmark, I think, of Dol Amroth's infantry force going forward, which prior to now was basically just a worse version of Gondor all round that augmented itself a bit with really strong heavy swordsmen, but not so much anymore. More of an identity of their own. The Talon Knights, of course, mace men, again armour-piercing damage twinned with decent defensive abilities, shields and maces. Dol Amroth spearmen, basic, but these basic units are going to be important given the quality that Ered, Luin and Mirkwood need to bring. I'm surprised to see this kind of cavalry. If they can smash through the outer defences and flood through with all of this cav, it could be really, really effective, but if they can't, they're going to be bottled up pretty much indefinitely. The Haven Knights of Athalon, melee cavalry, one of the best units of sword cavalry in the game, so they'll be able to go toe-to-toe with most of what the evil forces have at their disposal. But the Arathirim are maybe a more commonplace pick for Dol Amroth because of the damage they can do off the charge, especially when you combine them with the resplendent-looking Swan Knights. Big damage, of course, off all of these lances, and more basic lances are more useful in this version of the game now as well, and more melee cavalry as well, actually. Perithal Horse Guard wielding their sword two-handed, so we'll see. The ride of the Arathirim, maybe it will work, maybe it won't. More Dol Amroth spearmen, I mean it's expensive as well, so the Dol Amroth infantry force is very limited. They're going to be reliant on those Belfalas more so than they have done in the past. Dol Amroth halberdiers as well, good unit. I mean this is something else they have in contrast to Gondor. Gondor of course have armour-piercing two-hander spears, but they're a little bit different in how they work. These are a little bit more traditional and a little bit more in line with what many other factions have, the Dol Amroth halberds as well, similar to the sort of thing that you'd find in Rune or Dale's arsenal. Now, moving on to the defenders, starting off with Sin. It's been a while since we've seen Sin actually in one of these battles, but that will change in the near future, I think. He's playing as Mordor, Uruk halberds. I mean, we just got finished mentioning the Dol Amroth halberds and Mordor with their own flavour on things, of course, numbers being the order of the day when it comes to their basic units. And they're going to be very important when it comes to setting up those initial defences. If they can hold for a decent amount of time, especially against the smaller Dol Amroth army, they should be in for a pretty good time. We've got Olag High here as well. Obviously we know how strong monstrous infantry can be, albeit in the last battle replay we saw those skin changes did struggle because they got bottled up, although Mordor should be able to dictate the early pace in this battle, so you wouldn't expect to see the same thing here, especially not from the Olag High, who've been impressive pretty much every time we've seen them. The Beasts of Gorgoroth are intimidating when you see this many of them, but they're nowhere near individually as strong as the Mumakil are. The Javelins do help offset that a bit with their armour-piercing attacks, but again, we'll see how effective they can be with those. Temple Guard are in there, armour-piercing arrows. If they can isolate Dol Amroth's heavier cavalry units, they can get some pretty good value pretty quickly for themselves. And then, of course, the Troll Drummers as well, which will be encouraging all of their rank and file to remain in place. Is that it for Sin's army? Is that it for what we can see? Yeah, everything else hidden under these trees. Orc Javelins, unsurprising. Uruk infantry, helping to pad out a very numerous force. Moving on to Hidden, playing as Rhudaur. Rhudaur clansmen, again, as far as spears go, they've got a bit higher damage than equivalent units, and the big shields do help, but that's usually more of a factor when they're on the attack. When they're on the defence, they're going to be reliant on those values to help them hold the line. Rhudaur swordsmen as well, more used to being used as cannon fodder perhaps, but now they are going to have to try and form up a solid defensive force. Again, they'll accomplish this mainly through numbers, you would imagine. Etenmore's Troll Hunters in front as well, with some hefty armour-piercing attacks from afar, Traumman slavers as well, with those wicked-looking tridents of theirs going to be the centrepiece of the Rhudaur infantry force, along with, you'd have to say, the Hranadine pikemen, especially in a situation where Rhudaur are going to have the luxury of setting up a prepared defence. Under normal circumstances, those shields they bear are usually more useful for advancing into trouble, but now they're going to have to try and hold up against it. Hranadine nobles, again, a pretty good unit of cavalry when it comes to dealing damage off the charge and with armour-piercing attacks up close, though they are going to have to be a bit careful. If Dol Amroth are given the reign of the battlefield with all of their cav, then they are going to struggle against some of those units. Even the basic Dol Amroth melee cavalry might fancy its chances in force. And then across, more Rhudaur swordsmen, so the basics of Rhudaur again going for those numbers, which even when they're on the defence, if they can plaster those choke points with numbers, it has proven to be an effective strategy in the past, so let's see if it proves to be so again. Colonel Speaks 46, playing as the orcs and goblins of the Misty Mountains. Basic goblin archers, I mean, when it comes to skirmishing back and forth with any of the attacking armies really, albeit some of them don't have skirmishes by the looks of it, they would struggle, but again they're very cheap, and the Misty Mountains don't really have a huge amount when it comes to archers, but over here is the ace in the hole that they have when it comes to dealing damage from afar, which is their crossbows. Crossbows very often in battles like this can prove to be the making or breaking of your efforts, and I think with all the numbers and all the time they can buy, the damage could be substantial, especially given the slightly light on numbers attacking force I think we've seen, but again we'll have to wait and see on that. Goblin Kingsguard, a couple of units of Whiter Oak Fearmongers, a good centrepiece to the Misty Mountains force. They're not known for their quality, but where it exists it can be quite surprising. The Goblin Kingsguard are numerous for a unit as resilient as they are, and then the Whiter Oak Fearmongers also have that armour-piercing damage as well. And the Cave Troll Drummers will be helping all of the basic units of Moria Spearguard, and well, mostly Moria Spearguard to be fair, which is the most efficient entry-level Misty Mountains unit, to stay facing the right direction. Heavy Goblin Crossbows. The Goblin War Engine can be a little bit unpredictable, but if there is a time where you can try and sort of lower the risk as much as possible, it would be a battlefield like this, I suppose, especially given the fact that the attackers are going to be on open terrain, so there's no getting away from the fiery rain that's going to be coming their way, I would suggest, at least not entirely. But if they hit themselves, which is always the great catch-22 with this unit, Misty Mountains are one of the most vulnerable to the morale shocks that their own siege weaponry can deliver, so let's see. Cave Trolls not as resilient as the Olag High, of course, as we have seen in the past, but they are more numerous, more useful in terms of their unique, tighter bunching formation on the attack, but maybe they could punch their way through and start causing some chaos among the attackers' ranks. And finally, the last defending force is Tommy himself, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. Playing as Canned, Nurad Footman, generally speaking the Eastern men do have a good amount of armour piercing in their ranks, and Canned are no different. Combination of these guys, and I'm sure the Nurad Halberds are somewhere as well, have always made them a surprisingly decent infantry faction when it comes to these sorts of situations. Big shields as well, so that will help them against the savagery of Mirkwood's bowmen, which they are going to have to deal with here. Brotherhood of the Axe might be better served going up against Ered Luin, to be fair, but it might be that purely the base damage is needed against Mirkwood to help deal with the huge melee defense they have. Brotherhood of the Spear, very resilient unit, again big shields on them as well, will be a key part of the Candish infantry staying in the defensive positions they set up. Nurad Stormguard are a very good unit of bodyguard infantry, as we've seen before. Maybe less efficient against Mirkwood, because again they are sort of a more armour... well, I don't know actually. I think maybe the fact that Mirkwood don't have a phalanx unit of their own means that the Nurad Stormguard are going to be effective regardless, but Mirkwood could try shooting them down with stuff like their Silver Thorns. We'll see. It's an interesting matchup this. Usually it's Mirkwood defending against a force like Canned, so it's a bit of role reversal. Nomadic Marauders, cheap javelins, we've already mentioned how effective they tend to be on the battlefield, and a couple of units of them certainly won't go amiss. Brotherhood of the Wain, my personal favourite chariot unit, because chariots can be fickle, but these guys can do good amounts of damage with their crossbow bolts, if nothing else, but when they get sent forward, will they have the free reign of the battlefield? They do have the Brotherhood of the Bow with them as well, a nice unit of horse archers to give a bit of mobility. Here are the Nurad Halberds we mentioned earlier, plenty of Variag warriors. Cheaper heavy swordsmen are a decent way of being cost effective against the elves as long as you support them properly. more Brotherhood of the Bow and Chieftain's Vanguard, so a lot of horse archers as well in and around this army. Not a lot of foot archers though, so a lot of their skirmishing is going to have to be done from horseback, from what we can see, which might be a risk given Mirkwood's foot archers. And then the Blood Trolls, which are not dissimilar to the Olag High actually, very good at dealing damage quickly. The Elves and the Dwarves do have good options for dealing with them quicker than most, but even they will take damage at the hands of these guys when an engagement does take place, which the Elves can't afford too much of, and neither can the Dwarves. There will be a cut, of course, because I do think, based on the deployment zones of this map, the defenders do have to roll forwards so they can actually take up the intended positions. But yeah, this should be an interesting one, because it's been a while since we've seen this sort of very sort of stereotypical beach landing kind of battle. But yeah, I'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. We shall rejoin a little early again, I think, because once again I think this is going to be a case of I'm not really sure where the first attack is going to be, although Dol Amroth have posted up at the foot of the hill, albeit with a single unit of in-formation spears against the entirety of the Mordor force. I mean, this is, I believe, some of the wider choke points that the attackers have access to, but Dol Amroth may not have the infantry numbers as a result of their cavalry focus to be able to take full advantage of that, especially not against a force like Mordor, which is relatively easily going to be able to blanket larger areas with sheer numbers. So Dol Amroth may need a little bit of extra support in order for them to be able to get through. Elsewhere, it's going to be a case of quality for the attackers as the Goblin War Engine starts to make its way forwards as well. Canned, all of this armour piercing, of course. I mean, it will be useful against any Dwarven units that head their way, but it's going to be less so against Mirkwood. Really, the best thing the Nurad footmen provide against Mirkwood is the large rectangular shields that they have, which will do its bit to blunt some of Mirkwood's ranged power. Certainly not in melee though. Canned are going to be again reliant on numbers and maybe close range support from their pretty good horse archers in order to be able to keep Mirkwood's quality in melee at bay. As we've seen somewhat recently, Mirkwood's quality can be very effective against that kind of force. Orc fodder here in numbers, and over there Dol Amroth spearmen once again slowly trudging their way forwards. Some Talon Knights in direct support. The Talon Knights actually should be pretty good against most of what Mordor has to offer. Really, it's only the very best of their units that would feel comfortable against Dol Amroth's maceman. Heroic infantry as well as a few Rhudaur units making their way across just to try and make sure that Mordor hold on to this position. After all, I think if Dol Amroth were to be able to make a gap and started flooding through with their cavalry and causing all sorts of chaos in behind enemy lines, that would be one way in which the defenders would be in some trouble. They need to keep organised and keep their choke points in good order. Meanwhile, Mirkwood moving forward, I would assume this is a sign that the battle is about to get underway. Brotherhood of the Wain. Of course, chariots mainly used as a means of running through enemy lines, causing chaos as well. Used as a defensive tool, it's not too common. It might have to be the case that they use their crossbows and they're only used in melee when Mirkwood are starting to flag a little bit in terms of numbers. After all, the elves may not have the mass to be able to deal with chariots en masse as easily as the others. Chieftain's Vanguard atop the cliffs as well, being used as more traditional archers, you would have to say. Further afield. Again, I think I've rejoined a little too early. I thought the battle was about to get underway, but once again I seem to have misjudged that. I've been making a real habit of that lately. But more units marching forwards. Oh no, there has been some sort of the Rangers of Nimrodel taking hits from something. Orc javelins, maybe? Yeah, it must be these Orc javelins. I mean, to put them right at the base of the cliff is asking for trouble from TS's perspective. Now we will actually see the first of the damage. And there's another unit of Rangers of Nimrodel over there as well. I mean, these guys have been focused down already. To be committed so early is probably a bit of a misstep from Dol Amroth, and based on their very, very risky army composition, I don't think they can afford too much of that. Meanwhile, the dwarves marching forward, getting involved in melee early, testing the Candish lines, a combination of the more defensive spearguard and the more aggressive stone hewers, albeit not the most organised of advances. That will change, of course, as more of the dwarves march their way into position, but a good mix of offense and defense here from the dwarven units, and as much as the Candish armour piercing will actually come in handy against the dwarven units, the overall quality, particularly of the spears, should be enough to keep this attack going for the long haul. Meanwhile, Hiriak moving forwards, Wooden Realm Axemen revealing themselves. Also, it would not surprise me if... well, actually no real ranged presence over here. Stone Giant is way back there. We'll have to keep an eye on him for when he decides to make his move. One of the Variags falls at the hands of those Dwarven axes. Warrior Spear Guard going to bunch up into the lines as well, offering their numbers. Again, the most efficient, certainly, of all of the basic Goblin units, but they are still regular Goblins. On an individual level, they're no match for Dwarves, but terrain advantage, numbers advantage, support close by, as the Elvelyn start to make their way forwards as well. Dorwinion not yet ready to fully test the waters of the Misty Mountains-led defence. Some Rhudaur units over here as well. I mean, to be fair, the Goblin War Engine in the position that it's in makes this a decidedly unattractive position to try and take. Belfast Marines in place. Still no desire on Dol Amroth's part to, again, moving forward. I mean, this game of cat and mouse against the Orc Javelins is not going to go in Dol Amroth's favour. And yet, they persist, especially with the Temple Guard moving forward. This could be the end of one of Dol Amroth's most effective weapons on the field, and this is another example of how a unit like the Orc Javelins can be efficient really no matter what. In this situation, even if they were to just stand there and accept the damage of the Rangers, they would still be doing their job, but they're also going to be able to return fire from atop these cliffs. Yeah, it's a very confusing situation, because if they move the Belfast Marines forward with how many of them there are, that would actually be the play here, but yeah, a bit of a serious misplay, I think. It's played well in the last few games that we've shown as TS, but that's not a particularly good start. More work going to need to be done. Reliant on that infantry and cavalry, which can of course turn the battle fairly quickly. Over here, once again, the cheap javelins are the ones that are going to open proceedings. River Patrol moving forward. One of the few units actually that the Misty Mountains regular infantry will feel confident against in melee, but once again it's going to be a case of peeking over the edge, throwing some javelins, and then running back once more. And they are going after the Moria spears as well. More javelins, point blank. It's a good amount of damage done. They will need to flee in short order. Trolls starting to waddle their way across as well, but it is the dwarves still who have moved in with the most gusto. Some support coming in from the side as well from the Elvelyn marksmen. Not the most damaging unit of archers, but still, that in conjunction with the level of quality of the dwarven infantry will be enough to ensure that the defenders will need to add more in order to hold on to this position. But the Snaga skirmishers in a good position as well to get some side hits on the dwarf infantry. Further back, Ered footmen still skulking around. Mirkwood testing the waters as well in melee. I mean, Woodland Realm Axemen are not going to be particularly good under arrow fire, but there isn't any archers nearby. Instead, Khand have elected to commit their melee powerhouse, the Blood Trolls, and that will be a problem for the Woodland Realm Axemen. You back them against Nurad footmen 1-to-1, but when you've got a unit of monstrous infantry of this quality in there, the rank and file of Mirkwood are not going to be enough to get the job done. Support coming in from the Hiri Peng just in behind. Ooh, hello. The Stone Giant starts to move forwards. Are we going to see what he is all about? Just going to lumber his way in. Oh, no, he's changed his mind. We'll keep an eye. I really don't want to look away and then for him to just get peppered up by crossbow fire or something and not have done anything. Stone Hewers, of course, going to be fairly domineering against the Moria Spear Guard. Still no territorial gains for the dwarves, but certainly you can say in terms of kills, that support coming in from the Elvalin marksman will definitely be much appreciated as well. You can see some cave trolls in the distance going after the river patrol. Again, caught a little bit flat-footed here at Dorwinion. The river patrol are not really going to be able to defend themselves too well in melee against the trolls. Each one of those swings is likely to result in another casualty. And/or Glade Guard would be the remedy for this, as these two trolls continue to just stand around here in melee. The rest of the unit retreating, but these guys staying behind to try and inflict what damage they can. Trolls counter-attacking down the cliffs are the sort of thing which the cavalry could be exceptionally useful at dealing with if they are clear, but I mean, they're moving across, but there's no way they're going to be able to land a charge against these units. Yeah, I mean, this is ambitious, I would suggest. And the Swan Knights are not particularly good in sustained melee either, so I don't really know what's going on here. Still confused. I mean, the troll dies, but it's as a result of the Vine Guard. Over here, meanwhile, Dol Amroth and Mordor still yet to test one another from a melee perspective. Mordor will still be very pleased with how the initial light skirmishing has gone. Everything that is important to them is still very much in reserve. I saw the Beasts of Gorgoroth looming over here on the flank, and they could cause a lot of problems actually to Dol Amroth on this side with a counter-attack. It's where Dol Amroth's cavalry needs to be close enough by to actually help mitigate what this could be. Yeah, now Dol Amroth, I mean, it's too late to flee at that point, to be honest. At that point you may as well stand there and fight, because at the very least the Dol Amroth spearmen will have a melee bonus against the beasts. A few of them getting into melee, a few of them standing on top of the cliffs. That's not the sort of thing that you can plan for, but the javelins raining down once more. Dol Amroth can scarce afford all of this, considering their lighter infantry focus today. Dol Amroth spearmen now moving up the hill to actually engage as well. All of their reinforcements are too far away though. I'm spending a lot of time complaining about Dol Amroth here, but I don't know what they're doing. Again, support coming in. Arrows hitting the backs of these spears. I mean, obviously they're superior to orc fodder, but they're going to struggle without any sort of support of their own. Belfalas Marines, this is exactly the sort of thing that they should be for, but still scattered and strewn across the beach as they are. Meanwhile, aha, the Stone Giant in melee. What is he doing? Did he just die? How thoroughly disappointing. Well, well, well. Snow trolls mobbing him, as it were. I mean, to be fair, it does look as though he did manage to at least buckle the initial line and allow the dwarves to get a little bit further forwards, but yeah. That was an anticlimax, wasn't it? Meanwhile, a unit that has been impressive, pretty much every time we've seen them, has been the Blood Trolls of Khand, in the way that monstrous infantry does tend to be. And they are still making life difficult for the elves, and also the Variag warriors getting into melee as well. Cheap two-handed swordsmen, but still, in terms of numbers, they are the sort of unit that Khand have that can go into melee against the elves and have a little bit more success, not unlike the Black Uruks from the Misty Mountains. Nomadic Marauders getting into position as well. I mean, taking a lot of damage from the elven archers on top of on the beach, but the javelins from atop the cliffs won't mind too much about that. Again, cheap enough to the point where you can put them into this situation, and the damage they're going to do to the infantry still means they'll pay for themselves and them some. Good damage being done. Sideswiping this elven infantry, and again, I really don't think that the attackers are going to have the staying power to be able to keep this up for an indefinite period of time. They're going to need to make something happen at some stage soon, otherwise I think the defenders will be able to hold on to this initial position, and this will be where the battle begins and ends. That one Snaga taking in the scenery, Morroquendi bows firing in as well in support. I mean, poison projectiles should do a good job at helping the dwarven attack against the Misty Mountains. And the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains have had the most luck of all the attackers so far, utilising their superior quality, but the whiter at Fearmongers will be the sort of thing which can help stymie that momentum which the dwarves did manage to gather. Troll drummers in position as well to help mitigate the effect that those poison projectiles may have been having on the goblin host. Still the Brotherhood of the Wain using their crossbow bolts as well. I mean, as much as the Blue Mountains have made the most inroads, there's no way that they're going to be able to keep up that sort of attack either. Dorwinion, again, like the Goblin War Engine may be there, but you're going to need to start doing something with your infantry, lads. Otherwise, the fate of the attackers is already sealed, I fear. Talon Knights and Dol Amroth Spearmen. It is an interesting game of tag that Mordor and Dol Amroth seem to be playing, but it's certain Mordor have certainly had the better of it thus far, I would say. The problem is Dol Amroth are going to need to get some really good wins under their belt in order to be able to reverse some of the losses they've already taken. And again, you know, Swan Knights, the Melkor's Abominations are fantastic as an anti-cavalry unit, but Dol Amroth have the numbers that they should be able to deal with these Caragor riders without too many problems. Uruk Halberds marching down the hill, the Orc Fodder losing in melee, of course, against the Belfalas Marines, but with some halberdier support, that may very well shift once more. Getting into melee. Belfalas Marines, Feranodyne Rangers atop the cliffs as well. Again, doing damage. Keeping Dol Amroth's cavalry at bay is a problem as well, because all of the money that they invested into it, and it can't even be deployed because it needs to stay away from the cliffs, otherwise it's going to take a load of damage from all of the skirmishes at the top of the cliffs, but then it's going to be too far away to react when the moment may come that they could be super useful. Belfast Marines still doing their thing, some slightly depleted spears joining in melee as well. I mean, counter-attacking down the hill is not without its risks for Mordor, especially when it comes to just committing their basic units like this, but the drummers keeping these units in line. What happened to the beasts? Beasts of Gorgoroth would be maybe useful here. I mean, one of them died in the end at the hands of those spearmen. Meanwhile, Dorwinion now moving forward the Goblin War Engine immediately, unsurprisingly, sees the Dorwinion advance and is going to try to punish it accordingly. Not using Flaming Shot, which is probably the play, because if they do accidentally hit their own units, already the Moria Spearguard is shaken, so it would surely send them fleeing, but they'll be hoping that it is Dorwinion that run back down to the shoreline. Whip of javelins through the air. Elvalin Vanguard, the superior spear unit, of course, but Dorwinion sending forward more infantry now. Snaga Skirmishers and River Patrol. Neither will particularly enjoy being in melee, but the River Patrol will enjoy it less, considering the artillery is still going about its grisly work. Victory seems certain. In come the cave trolls as well, so more damage is going to be required from the Dorwinion infantry. So far, the attackers have had it all their own way, to be honest. Every engagement we've seen has been better for them than it has been for the opposition. I think it's really only here, really only the Blue Mountains still, that are doing things, but how much longer can they keep this up for? I mean, Brotherhood of the Axe will do pretty well against those dwarves. Good amount of damage coming in. The numbers of dwarven infantry, perhaps, in question, as the dwarven javelins continue to do their thing, trying to go after the snow trolls and avenge their stony friend. Meanwhile, Mirkwood suffering the fate of many an elven attacker by the looks of things. If you look out there, it's not exactly a veritable horde, is it? And again, in melee, not necessarily the best to deal with Mirkwood, but positionally, they've managed to do the business, and javelins and the Chieftain's Vanguard up there as well. Continuing, oh no, it's Brotherhood of the Bow now. Blood Trolls, only 2 of them remain, but they've definitely played their part in doing damage to the elves. So committed at the right time, you would suggest. I mean, Cand will need more reinforcements over here, and the fact that they're committing more against the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains does mean they need to be a bit careful not to undercommit against Mirkwood, and then all of a sudden the elves could find themselves establishing a position at the top of the cliffs, and that would be not ideal, considering the defenders have managed to keep things on the up and up for the time being. Guardians of the Blue Mountains now pulling out their short swords and getting into melee. The beauty of any dwarven projectile units is the fact that through survivability alone they're going to be useful in melee, though trolls may not be ideal. More Whiter Rook Fearmongers as well. One of the better units the Misty Mountains have for dealing with their dwarven arch nemesis. Further afield, Oroquenby Stalkers moving forward, another reasonably expensive unit of cavalry, which thus far has not really proven to be all that useful. Projectiles may score them a good amount of kills, but the infantry still spinning its wheels. I mean, the Nandor Blade Guard should help to polish off these cave trolls, but that attack from Dorwinion, I mean, maybe predictably the Goblin War Engine doing the business against them. Meanwhile, Beasts of Gorgoroth, the counter-attack from Mordor. Double Amroth Halberdiers now in melee. I mean, good amounts of damage coming off of them, but is it going to be enough? All of the infantry, they are taking losses. You can see how much more fragile the Beasts of Gorgoroth are. Being in melee for any length of time will kill them off, whereas the Mumakil, they're a little bit easier to control, the Mumakil as well. Being a smaller unit means they don't scatter in the way that the Beasts of Gorgoroth can. Throwing axes from the top of the cliffs as well. No rest for the weary from a Dol Amroth perspective. All of the hatchets now buried in the sand. Belfast Marines trying to do their thing. Olag High in the distance, we'll take a look at that in a moment. What remains of the Beasts of Gorgoroth are now going to retreat, but they've left the Dol Amroth infantry force in tatters, really, and Temple Guard continuing to fire away at the still ineffective attacking cavalry. And now, I mean, if the defending cavalry is allowed to be domineering, that's really the final nail. And the Olag High managing to assist the numbers in just swamping over the Talon Knights. Like, individually the Talon Knights would feel reasonably comfortable. Maybe not so much against the Olag High, they'd still be okay against them, relatively speaking, but it's just a case of being utterly overwhelmed. As Mordor swamp forward. Again, can this cavalry, as the battle maybe actually takes the final part of the battle, may take place on the sands of the beach rather than on top of the cliffs, with how the attackers are forcing, or how the attackers are being driven back. Belfast Marines doing their best. I feel like Dol Amroth's new infantry look, that where the Belfast Marines play a huge part in it, can work, but the numbers just weren't there on this occasion. Defeat seems certain. Beasts of Gorgoroth still throwing their javelins as well. Over here in the middle, the Dorwinion still have more in the way of reinforcements that they can commit. And indeed, actually, the Alvalin Hammer Guard have been committed to the front line, and they will be very good against pretty much everything that the Misty Mountains have to offer. Certainly the regular Moria units will be absolutely no match for a unit of their quality. That armour piercing on the end of those hammers. Some Rhudaur units heading over to try and support this Misty Mountains front line and keep it. I mean, this is not ideal from a defending perspective. That's suicidal almost to try and use the artillery on that angle, and unsurprisingly it results in routing their own men, and that could be exactly the moment the attackers have been looking for. If Dorwinion are now able to move forward and Y2K reacting almost immediately, all of his remaining infantry mobilising, going to try and establish a position, and they do need to be fairly quick with it, because now that all of the defending units have routed, the only ones that can be hit now by the Goblin War Engine are the Dorwinion infantry, so they're going to need to get up here quickly. Rhudaur units on the flank still remain. Poison projectiles pouring salt into the defenders' wounds there. Madness. Morroquendi Glade Masters and Morroquendi Pikes, so all the quality now as the men in purple, men and elves in purple. Goblin War Engine. After being initially so good, could that be the moment where the battle turns around? I mean, they're still doing damage to Dorwinion as they will, but Paradigm Nobles, in Dorwinion's haste to move forward, and they have to try and silence the Goblin War Engine, the defending cavalry may very well have its opportunity. Blackback Mountain Berserkers here in numbers as well. All of that Elvelyn infantry will also establish more of an organised position for Dorwinion at the top of the hill. Stalkers. Dorwinion flooding forwards now, and indeed this is where the Dol Amroth cavalry could really play its part. They finally have a way to get around the defending choke points. Is that going to be the moment? Meanwhile the dwarves being steadily forced back down the hill themselves. The High Thanes of Azagal, all in all, doing their best, and indeed in a halberd to halberd engagement they are the superior of the White Uruks, but it's whether they have the numbers. The Snow Trolls will also try to damage their formation somewhat. Still got some Frost Spears, but that's it for the dwarves, I think. Overall, their less numerous nature showing itself once more. Mirkwood's starting to do the business as well, though. The Ents, the counterpoint to the Blood Trolls that Cand committed earlier, have Mirkwood weathered the storm as well. Mirkwood and Dorwinion, the ones to maybe see the attackers through. Again, the Entwives. There's not really much Cand have. I mean, yeah, the Storm Guard, and there's a lot of heavy swordsmen, but stuff like the Goblin Infantry is not going to be the sort of thing which can stop Entwives or indeed any of the Mirkwood Infantry with any sort of reliability. Damage coming in from the Goblin Archers. Again, that's volume, but it's not necessarily quality of damage. And at this point it's just a case of trying to make the Mirkwood army as small as possible so that any victory they achieve can only be considered Pyrrhic. Javelins coming in as well. I mean, we've mentioned in the deployment phase how the Elder Council, you can struggle to be efficient with them, but more shots like that, and Red Knight may very well manage it. Just skipping across to the other side of the battlefield. I mean, Rhudaur and Mordor, after their relatively by-the-books victory over Dol Amroth's infantry force, now going to have to move across and try to help deal with the developing situation, which the defenders now find themselves in. Which realm enslavers? What's going on here? I mean, it's going to be very difficult to keep track of this now because cavalry is now roaming around, but Cand, Morroquendi Stalkers, I mean, the Chieftain's Vanguard, well known for being one of, if not the tankiest unit of horse archers in the game. Candish General falls. Mirkwood's finest, slaying him, and now Lance charges as well, coming in, dealing more damage to the riders. Morroquendi Stalkers doing the business as well, scattered for Outram Javelins. I mean, that was a big moment, that. If that Misty Mountains and Rhudaur position didn't rout in the face of friendly fire from that Goblin War Engine, if they'd just held on, all of this infantry would have been bottled up, and I feel like the attackers were not that far away from it being an unsalvageable situation. But as it is, they've now managed to open the battlefield up a little bit, turn it a little bit more chaotic, and try to leverage some of their quality. Although, speaking of quality, the Goblin Kingsguard will not go down without a fight, and the Nandor Blade Guard may need a little bit of assistance. Atomor's Troll Hunters taking hits from the Morroquendi Bows. Nomadic Marauders will be slaughtered by Morroquendi Bows in melee as well. We did actually see briefly from a distance the Goblin War Engine crew is now fleeing after the Hammer Guard and the Glade Masters managed to get into melee, not without taking damage, but the artillery position has been lost. A pivot on which the whole battle could be decided at this point, but back come the Witch Realm Enslavers, with Rhudaur now moving forward to try and deal with this strong point of Dorwinion infantry. Helvellyn moving forward to help reinforce their elites. More Stalkers. There are halberds on the way across as well, but struggling to get themselves into position quickly. And without reinforcements over here, the High Thanes of Azagal and the Frost Spears may also have a way in, so they may be very depleted, but... Well, as soon as I say that, of course, the Blue Mountains General does fall, but... These Frost Spears have got a bit of ammunition left. They could also prove to be a real problem. Heavy Goblin crossbows. Mirkwood, yeah. The battle has definitely turned on that moment. Mirkwood and the Blue Mountains, in varying states of disrepair, admittedly, both now also able to get through the cliff-top defence. And now from a defender's perspective, I think it may be however Mordor and Rhudaur choose to regroup, how they choose to tackle this new problem of theirs. Canned are going to have to throw their units in and try and do some damage, but you can see here the halberds not up to it mentally. 3 Brotherhood of the Bow, Dorwinion moving in with more units, Morroquendi pikes, but in response to that Rhudaur have their own pikes, and from a numbers perspective Rhudaur will certainly fancy their chances in this engagement, so Dorwinion will require reinforcements to keep the good times going for the attackers. Those poison projectiles. As Morroquendi Stalkers, I mentioned how earlier on they weren't really doing the business, but in more recent times they have definitely proven to be a worthwhile addition, although leaving it a little bit late to try and get away from the far more dangerous in melee Hranodine nobles. What do we have further back? Are they going to regroup? No, they are. This little encampment area, higher terrain, Mordor having to take the long way around because the map is somewhat split. You can go through the trees, but Rhudaur having already done that. It's a good position to fall back to, this little area. The attackers, after all, the onus is still on them to move into defender territory, and the Black Bolts will be pretty damn good against all of the Helvellyn contingent that Dorwinion have to offer. Yeah, Dorwinion badly need reinforcements at this point, but Mirkwood, Perithal Horse Guard running through the trees. It's got to be pretty difficult for Dol Amroth to keep control of their cavalry in and under the trees. It's very dense cover as well. Morroquendi bows in melee against the Etamor's Troll Hunters. You back the elves in that situation, trying to deal with all the stragglers, and then once Mirkwood and what remains of Ered Luin arrive, they can start doing the business. But you can see there the repeater projectiles of the Frost Spears. If they can get into a position where they can do some consistent damage, the defenders may get a little bit nervous. Perithal Horse Guard charging into the Goblin King's Guard. I don't really know if the... Well, we're not viewing it from Dol Amroth's perspective anyway, but I don't know if it would even be possible for the cavalry in this kind of battles to be able to make up for the horrendous loss that the Dol Amroth infantry force took. They can try and help their allies now, but you can see here that Rhudaur moving further back. The Goblin War Engine has been remounted now as a result of Rhudaur forcing Dorwinion back. The Goblin War Engine does have a lot to answer for after all, as they continue to fire away, trying to get as many of their barrel projectiles downrange as possible. Trollshall Axe Thrower is going to get in the way of the Morroquendi bows as once again Dorwinion and Rhudaur face off. We are now within the final 10k frames, the sharp end of any battle, and based on what Mordor still have left, I would still back the defenders to get this done, especially seeing as the defenders, they're well within their rights to post themselves up in a defensive position like this, especially seeing as the Dol Amroth cavalry is now roaming around. Once again, it's going to have to content itself with hovering around on the periphery. Even stuff like fodder is dangerous to it after all. Yeah, there's still a lot of quality that Mordor have at their disposal. Dorwinion's general falls. Definitely done their bit though, Dorwinion. Can't say that they haven't greatly contributed. The High Thanes, once again, proving to have a very good fight themselves in less than ideal circumstances for them, but in terms of sheer quality, they and the Palace Guard and the Temple Executioners of Mordor are probably the strongest units that remain on the field. Frost Spears firing away. I mean, this is a concern. The fact that the Goblin War Engine has managed to successfully retreat is another problem for the attackers. For the attackers, I think they're going to have to rely on quality, but the problem with doing that is I think Mordor have got what it takes to at least contest that with all of these Black Númenórean units, the Olakai, Pikes, I mean the Black Walls, they've got everything they need, I think, the defenders to be able to do the business. The Entwives coming in, going after again. A lot of these are just rank and file units, so they will be able to pad out their kill count quite nicely against this kind of unit. I'm a little bit surprised actually that the defenders are electing to come down here even. Maybe they have to, because the Frost Spears will be able to just continuously fire away as the projectiles skim across the floor, and the Goblin artillery crew not exactly the most survivable, so every hit that's scored is almost certain to be a kill, and the classic Medieval 2 problem of the artillery spinning on the spot. Colonel speaks, there's nothing you can do about that. That may result in the demise of the artillery, although it's definitely played its part already, the Goblin War Engine. Maybe one of the most significant units on the battlefield today, as the Olakai and the Entwives engage in a Battle of the Titans as well. Projectiles continue to stream overhead. Ooh. Direct hit. Electing to get involved in a skirmish battle is the artillery. I mean, in all fairness, the mangonels themselves are actually acting as a pretty good barrier, and I don't think the repeaters are capable of destroying artillery pieces, given the fact that many bullets are hitting them. But the damage remains at 0. Damage is still being done though, projectiles bouncing all over the place, so they're definitely getting kills here, the Frost Spears. Whether it's going to be enough is anyone's guess. Cavalry still roaming through the fields over that way. Mirkwood testing Mordor's rear defensive position. I mean, Orc fodder will definitely not be up to the task of stopping any sort of Mirkwood infantry, but it's going to be down to numbers. It will be close, this one. It's been a battle of many twists and turns. As I said though, I mean, the Entwives pushing their way through. High Thanes, the defensive positions. Witchram and Slavers, another good quality unit that the defenders can call upon. Blackwolds in the trees, having to steer well clear of all the projectiles, of course, with their complete lack of armour. These Entwives, though, have definitely proven to be a bit of a game changer for Mirkwood. It is a unique thing they have in their arsenal. They do lack more, well, like phalanx units and such, and obviously they lack in terms of numbers, but monstrous infantry like this is usually... There goes the Misty Mountains General. Could be important that, actually. The remaining goblins will probably flee as a result. But as I was saying, monstrous infantry is usually an evil faction only sort of thing. And considering Mirkwood being as quality heavy as they are, having it in their roster gives them a completely different dynamic when using it to pretty much every other faction in the game. And it's definitely proven to be their X factor in this one. High Thanes in close proximity as well. Still, I mean, Frost Spears, Mirkwood, I mean, committing forward all these units now. Now that the Beasts of Gorgoroth are out like this, the Dol Amroth cavalry should be on station immediately to try and charge into them and squash this, because it's one of the few ways in which the Dol Amroth cavalry can be guaranteed to have a positive impact on... It's got to be the Mirkwood general. Yeah, they've missed a bit of a trick here, I think, Dol Amroth. Again, where is the cavalry? Surely it can't all be dead. Surely it can't be waiting on the front side. Yeah, and as a result of that cavalry not being in support of Mirkwood, I think Mirkwood are going to end up getting crushed here with Olag High from the front and then Beasts of Gorgoroth and Malkor's Abominations charging them from the rear. As dangerous as the Palace Guard are, and all of Mirkwood's quality is over here, but I think that might be the difference there. From the front, meanwhile, Rhudaur's numbers helping to prop up the defensive position. Stuff like the Blackwold's coming in should be enough to finally topple the Entwives as well. And no more ammunition available to the Frost Spears means that all that they can do now is get into melee and see if their Dwarven resilience will be enough to see them over the line, but I don't think it will somehow. Pretty much all that remains of Dorwinion has now fallen away. Peeling themselves off the front line. Do they still have a bit of ammunition? Grenadine Rangers moving their way forwards. Do they still have a bit of ammunition? They definitely played their part from the cliff tops. They do still have. Both units will be content to use what remains of their supply. Still that Amroth cavalry buzzing around, but ultimately ineffective. Moving across now, but too late to save Mirkwood. You would think, I think the numbers are the key here. Pikes and high tier Black Numenorians. They may be and it may be enough to bring down the Olag High and such, but I don't think they have the numbers any longer, and when Elven units start to break, you know that things are looking pretty bleak. Can they get a good charge? I mean, they're having to go uphill, so the momentum isn't really there. Bit of a dull nudge there. Of course, you don't want to stay in melee too long, even against the most basic of Orcish spears. Turn around and then they'll come back. Troll drummers close by, keeping the orcs, even the basic ones, pointing in the right direction. Mordor, the ones mainly taking the lead against Mirkwood. Rhudaur here taking the lead on the frontal defence. Not much of Cand or the Misty Mountains remaining. Of course, it was over on this side where the attackers did have their joy. It was mainly Mordor and Rhudaur, the Mordor and Rhudaur-led defence that was so dominant against Dol Amroth that remains and will probably be what sees the defenders over the line in this one. So a defender victory, albeit people probably won't approve because it will be an evil defender victory. Unless something dramatic happens now. The Goblin War Engine has actually managed to remount, but they're tilting around and ultimately they tilted right into the High Thanes, who once again have shown how incredibly tough they are to take down. High tier halberd to halberd between themselves and Rhudaur's Witch Realm Enslavers, but you back the dwarves there, it's only really the numbers that are around them that makes the difference. Backed up against the Mangonels. I assume that must be the Misty Mountains, because there's still those Nurad halberds, and Rhudaur and Mordor, of course, are still healthy enough. Swan Knights. The regular Swan Knights are probably my favourite looking unit of cavalry in the game, although they rout in the face of pikes and Black Numenorian bodyguards. To be fair, I mean, this has been fighting on an incline like this, horribly outnumbered. This has been a fight that Mirkwood have been losing really ever since the hammer and anvils from the beasts and the abominations. But the fact that they were still fighting is a sign that their quality is still high. Swan Knights charging in. I mean, they may as well at this point just try and get as many kills as they possibly can. As the drums continue to be sounded. Temple Guard. They were using their armour-piercing arrows on Dol Amroth in the initial defence earlier, and now they will be using their swords to try and bring about the battle's swift conclusion. Swan Knights fleeing. The Arathirium will stick around for a little bit longer. Who will be the last ones left? High Thanes of Azagar getting surrounded now, and now they start to tumble away now that their melee defense and their formation are broken. Dwarven armor is strong, but it's not indestructible. Cranadine. The final stand of elves, dwarves and knights. Whatever happens to the Haven Guard, or mounted, not Haven Guard, the Sword Cavalry unit, the Sword Cavalry Bodyguard. Again, Dol Amroth's cavalry may very well have been effective in that transitional stage where we couldn't really see them because of the tree cover, but I doubt whatever they did in that phase of the battle is enough, honestly. Fighting to the death in close proximity against the blackened swords of the Temple Executioners. Arathirium charging and playing ring around the rosy really with the Vranadine nobles, fancying their chances in a one-to-one against them, but ultimately being coaxed into a prepared line of Uruk halberds is surely going to be the end of them. To be fair, not routing yet. Not dying in quick order either. Fair play to them from that perspective. Malcolm's abominations will try and chase them down, although only 7 of them remain. The lances do come down, but surely now, when things look like that, that is bound to be the end. Tough, aren't they? Significantly tougher than many other units of cavalry the game has to offer. Shaken and tired as they once again break off. So will Dol Amroth be the last ones left alive? I mean, just having a quick look over here. Yeah, maybe. The great irony. The Arathirium. The last torchbearer is Imrahil himself. One of the last to fall, from an attacker's perspective. I wonder where geographically this would even be, seeing as the forces of evil were on the defence. Somewhere in that region, between Athelion and near Harad, perhaps. It's the best I have. Well, there we have it. Player admits defeat. Probably the dwarves. The Arathirium. That is going to be that. Victory for the defenders. 8% difference. I think that's about fair considering how this battle went. 4v4s, of course, are always going to be a little bit fairer for the defenders anyway. But that mass rout that was caused by that Goblin War Engine, given the structure of this map where the outer defensive points are so important, as soon as you lose one you can cause the dreaded domino effect to start to take place, and under normal circumstances I think that may have been pretty terminal for the defenders, but the scale of their victory against Dol Amroth, and also the fact that just in general they didn't have enough in the tank really, the attackers, in terms of infantry. I don't think, when you consider obviously the dwarves are infantry focused and they definitely played into that, but they're a smaller faction in general. Mirkwood, they have to go quality heavy really, and so I don't think Red Knight could have done anything else really in terms of composition, but still in terms of the overall feel of things you're already at a numbers disadvantage when you consider the sizes of the armies they were going up against. Dorwinion probably the most conventional of the attacking forces. Again, the elven human split does help them. They don't really have too much that they can do with their compositions in all fairness because of the the roster that they have being a bit more limited. It was Dol Amroth though, I think. You have to say that the risk of taking that much cavalry from TS did not pay off at all. He wasn't really able to utilise it in the way that he would have wanted, and his infantry ultimately was too small in nature, and it got crushed by Mordor and Rhudaur in a counter-attack that was supported by dangerous projectiles from on top of the cliffs. So that was a bit of a deficit, and in the end, the momentum that Dorwinion were able to give their team as a result of that accidental mass rout that was self-inflicted by the Misty Mountains, in the end it wasn't enough to carry through until the very end. Although Mirkwood, to be fair, managed to get through their position all on their lonesome with the might of their Entwives. But yeah, a very multifaceted game this, you have to say. But I do think the defenders were worthy victors here. I think that it was a little bit more well organised, well planned, and if they had gone on to lose it, it would have been a result of slightly poor judgment maybe, but also when it comes to artillery, there's always an amount of fortune involved, and it would have been poor fortune really to see all of those units rout, and for that to be the difference maker. Let's see what did the damage for Tommy's army though. One of the lower killing armies on the defending force, but then he was primarily going up against Ered, Luin and Mirkwood, so good quality kills these will be. Brotherhood of the Axe and the Wain doing nicely. Those crossbows, of course, we didn't actually see the Brotherhood of the Wain charge into melee, but when they did, presumably they died off pretty quickly. Plenty of units getting over 100 kills, and all of those are going to be good, of course. Brotherhood of the Bow, Nomadic Marauders, the Blood Trolls were committed early, and that proved to be a decent enough decision because it did end up blunting Mirkwood's numbers enough. So I think you can't really complain too much about that. Basic units struggled, as you would kind of expect, really, considering it was a primarily Mirkwood that they were having to go up against. Of course, again, a little bit disappointing that the stone giant of Ered Luin was killed off so quickly in this battle. Really, the defenders. I wish they'd, I wish we'd been able to see him do his thing for a little bit longer in the battle, basically, before the defenders mobbed him with snow trolls and managed to kill him off with all the damage. Obviously, single entity units in Medieval 2 are hard to get to work because of that very reason. But yeah, it is what it is. We will see him in his full glory at some point in the future, I'm sure. But yeah, anyway, big thank you to Tommy for sending this battle in. Big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this one. This is the only replay I've got on this version of the game, so I will now be able to update and be fully in line with the rest, and I won't need to concern myself too much with missing out on some battles, as I have already. I did unfortunately miss out on a 4-way free-for-all, but again, it is what it is. Like, when there are these updates that happen, things are going to fall through the cracks. I've just come to accept that now. So hopefully when everything gets standardised, which this build has been the active one for the past couple of weeks now, I think, so we won't be getting micro updates, and it'll be a little bit easier to keep track of. I think, well, I won't say anything too significant yet, but I have an idea of what's going to be on the horizon in terms of some battles that will be coming. But yeah, we'll see. Hopefully more tournament battles, more Silmarillion battles, maybe the occasional Last Alliance battle is how we will continue for the time being. Plans for the further future, I've got a few ideas on those, but we won't go into too much detail on that until it's a little bit more relevant. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.